yesterday you said that the Atom was your favorite superhero just because he's a physics teacher?
One of them.
Okay, so what are
Well,
some
no, actually also because I just think the idea of being able to change size is actually very cool.
So you're a fan of like
And so
Ant-Man, Giant
I
Man?
also like Ant-Man as well. Yeah. So yeah, in fact, actually, people think that I make fun of Ant-Man, but I devoted
People have
3
a
chapters
tendency
to her.
Okay.
So anyway, no, because I think that's actually very interesting. I think it's just kind of a strange, cool power. But in addition, from a physics point of view, it's great because there's all sorts of different physics that you can talk about as you go from different length scales.
Right. So you say that heroes' powers are basically impossible. You get that one-time forgiveness.
One-time miracle exemption from the laws of nature.
Is there anybody who doesn't fit into that category?
Well, most people would say Batman.
I was going to say, what about non-powered superheroes?
Right. Except, of course, given the number of times that he's been knocked unconscious in his 70-plus years of fighting crime, and he hasn't suffered permanent brain damage, he must have some sort of like Homer Simpson extra thick padding in his skull or something to prevent concussion damage.
Sure.
So even there, another close one is Iron Man. Right? Exoskeletons exist. Jet boots exist. Rocket packs exist. The one thing that doesn't exist is a power supply to run it for more than a few minutes. So, Iron Man has a little arc reactor that puts out about the size of a hockey puck that puts out the power of 3 nuclear power plants. If we knew how to make that, we wouldn't need the superhero suit. It would be that enough would be it.
Well, speaking of Iron Man, I have a good panel for you. I thought you would enjoy from a recent event.
Oh, this is where he's fighting Magneto.
Yes.
Yes, it's very. Yes, that's such a huge nerd that I can tell you spot the one that came out on this past Wednesday.
And so exactly. And so everybody was wondering, Iron Man versus Magneto, that's crazy. So obviously he was wearing a nanosuits, nanotechnology.
Well, actually, so that's exactly right. He could. I mean, there are, as I mentioned in my talk, not all metals are magnetic. Right? It could be a suit made out of pure gold or silver, or a gold-silver alloy, or what have you. That would be diamagnetic. So Magneto is trying to polarize it, and he is pushing it away. It's not. There are other materials that are non-magnetic that don't respond. And again, if you want a strong suit, you would definitely go with carbon nanotubes.
Okay.
And so
that doesn't sound crazy to you.
No. If you had, this was something that I talked about in another talk on Friday, that Spider-Man silk. Right? We see that in Spider-Man 2, he's stopping this runaway train.
Right.
And we can actually calculate how strong the webbing is, because we can estimate how fast the train is initially going, because we can see how long it takes to pass certain buildings. You can look up the mass of the train, and you can count the number of webbings and estimate the diameter, and then you can see the distance over which they stretch before the train comes to rest. So you can calculate what the tensile strength of the webbing is. And it turns out to be about 1,000 megapascals, which that's equivalent to 145,000 pounds per square inch. Steel cable has a tensile strength of about 250 to 500 megapascals. Spider silk, 1,200. And I said that in the movie it was 1,000.
Yeah. And
it's 1,200 for real spider silk.
Okay.
Which just points out they couldn't put it in the movie if it wasn't true.
Okay.
But, so that's very strong. Spider silk is stronger, pound for pound, than steel cable, and stretchier than nylon. I said 1,000 megapascals for spider silk. Carbon nanotubes, 60,000 megapascals.
Oh my gosh, okay. So
if you could make them long enough, which is we can't do yet, and braid them together, you would have a material that would be no longer a fiber that is no wider than the period at the end of a sentence, could hold up 2 SUVs.
Oh my gosh, that's
right? So that would be the material to make the cable for the space elevator.
the space elevator. So what about this part? Basically what happens here is that Tony Stark uses his satellites in space to siphon magnetic fields from Jupiter, which fly through space and eventually hit him, which he is able to then blast back at Magneto. How do you feel about that?
I feel I'm glad that he's not doing it to me.
Okay. Does this seem like something that's even plausible?
There's always some things that are a little bit or very much dodgy, right? And often in the very same issue, there will be something that's wrong.
Okay.
So my goal is not to say, like, if you go up to Superman, you go to Iron Man, you have 60 plus years more of storylines. Power levels go up and down, abilities come in and out of play.
And as our real technology gets better,
that's right. What seems to be more
referenced.
fantastic. That's right. And so, what I do is I say, what is the physics principle I want to illustrate? And then I use a, nerd level encyclopedic knowledge to cherry pick what is a situation where the character is shown illustrating that principle. Sometimes they won't do it, they'll forget that they can do this.
Right. As different writers coming along, they kind of forget history.
Exactly right. So I'm not worried about that. I'm worried about trying to find things. Now, I don't know how you would siphon the magnetic field. Jupiter has a very large magnetic field, but I don't know how you would siphon that and then blast it.
It seems to be traveling through space like lightning, as you can see.
Yes,
and then
there's
just
also
hitting
arcing,
Tony.
which is very strange because why would it change direction like that, as opposed to just go in a straight line from
artistic interpretation.
Well, I think that's exactly right. That's the same thing when you're dealing with doing consulting for movies. Is at the end of the day, they're going to go for the stuff that is the most visually
that looks cool,
right? And I don't go to the movies with a pad of paper and a calculator saying, "Ooh, my physics sense is tingling." But it's more like if they get something right, it's catching an inside joke.
So do you think that comic books and movies should try to be more scientifically accurate?
What they do, and I've done consulting for Watchmen, I did consulting for a little bit for Green Lantern, but I'm doing a fair amount for Amazing Spider-Man. It's coming out this summer. And their goal, which I think is a good goal, is to get the science just so right that you don't notice it while you're watching the movie.
So you're not thinking, wait, that's
exactly right. Any moment that you're saying, that's not right, or that's not what a real lab looks like, or that's not what a scientist would say or do, is a moment when you're not paying attention to the story. Right? If this stuff starts bothering you, they call them refrigerator moments. When you're home, after the movie, reaching in the refrigerator for like a beer, and then you say, wait a second, they're perfectly happy with those. Right? So they need to get it. They need to get you from the movie to the refrigerator. If they can do that, that's fine. If you want something completely scientifically accurate, we call that the news.
Right.
And so, so at some level, it's going to fudge. And the issue is just, are they going to play fair? Once they set out the ground rules, right? And then Spider-Man gets trapped in something, if he starts escaping via his heat vision, right? You say, no, that's exactly right.
Did Spider-Man get heat vision?
Exactly right. Or say Superman 2, when he suddenly can shoot like white beams of force from his palm.
Superman tends to get powers
or the giant cellophane.
Right. That's a very famous thing.
Right? Those things,
So as long as they make sense in context of the storyline itself, and the viewer walks away not thinking,
so what the science consultants will sometimes do is that even before the script is finished, we'll do some brainstorming about, this is how Spider-Man or the Lizard would adhere to walls, right? And there are certain materials that they wouldn't stick to, so maybe you can do that. How would spider sense actually work? And I proposed a mechanism, but I can't even talk about it because I know it's going to be in the movie.
Okay.
And I also proposed a mechanism by which you could, distract it and kind of overwhelm it.
So even though you're consulting, you're not exactly sure what makes it into the movie until you see
I did consulting for them before the script was finished. I never read a finished script, but then I came back a couple of times or via emails where they needed things like an equation for Peter Parker to write on a blackboard. So I took a real science equation that describes human mortality, and I changed it around enough because if it's an actual equation, then why would they be discussing it? They would know it.
Right.
But I did that, and so when you see this scene, and it's actually in the trailer even, there's some real science that started in that equation, and then I just added, stuff to make it visually, so that I made it unphysical.
Okay. That is really interesting. Well, we're probably, out of time because I know you have to get on stage, but thank you so much for your time.
A pleasure. Thank you very much.
Really, this was so great.